Hey, how are ya?
Hi, Clenitra. I'm good. How are you?
Good, thanks. My son is home today from school, so hopefully it'll be quiet in the background. My husband's corralling that, so
Oh, yeah. Maybe he'll make a cameo.
perhaps it's a little cranky today. So
Oh, yeah. The neighbor next door is their gardeners here. So I'm like, I hope they leave soon
oh
because it's
yeah,
very loud.
I didn't realize how much community garden work or lawn care happens at 10 o'clock in the
Yes.
morning, somewhere between 10 and noon. So
Yes. Well, let me make you co-host.
okay.
There we go. So a few participants have come in and then left, and I don't know if it's just odd. I don't know why it's doing that.
So you can see my PowerPoint, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm excited to be here. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Yes, I'm excited to see your presentation. I feel like I'm in a bit of a vacuum sometimes.
Oh, with what's happening, yeah.
Yeah. I'll work on admitting everyone into the meeting. Then I'll probably start like 3 minutes in just to give people time.
That's fine. Whenever you'd like.
Hi, everyone. We'll start in a couple minutes, just letting people get in the door, the virtual door. Okay, I'll start now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to No Cows Lunch and Learn. I will introduce our speakers speaker, Quinitra Stewart-Nadel, after a few housekeeping items. So first, this session is being recorded and will be made available to members. If you don't want to be recorded, remember to turn off your video cameras. Also, we ask that everyone follow NOCAL's code of conduct, which I linked in the chat. And let me know if you need that. But also, we encourage questions and we have allowed time for that. So please put them in the chat or save them for the end and we will make sure to answer them. Our speaker today, Quinitra Stewart-Nadel, is the head of professional development, research services librarian, and a lecturer in law at the Allen Queener Massey Law Library at Vanderbilt University. In addition to her degrees, Quinitra has earned a certificate in advanced legal writing, research, and drafting from the Walter F. George School of Law at Mercer University. She is an active member of the American Association of Law Libraries and the Southeastern chapter of the American Association of Law Libraries, among other organizations. Quinitra is also a licensed attorney in Georgia, where she represented indigent clients in a variety of civil cases through the Georgia Legal Services Program, and also in South Carolina, where she provided local and statewide policy advocacy on behalf of low-income communities through South Carolina Appleseed Legal Justice Center. So I will hand it over to Quinitra for her presentation. Remember to put your questions in the chat.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here to talk to you all and to hear from you all about what you're doing. I think that this past almost a year now, it's been quite a ride for all of us. So I just wanted to share a little bit about what we've been doing at Vanderbilt to kind of handle the COVID situation and adjust our services accordingly. I do just want to point out to you that we at the Vanderbilt Library are actually part of the larger university library system. So we, unlike some schools that are just solely within the purview of the law school, also have sort of an additional level of administration that affects us. And then also we have to collaborate with the other libraries in ways that might be different from how you have to collaborate. And so I'm going to focus on specifically the period from March to May through the fall semester, because it's really what I would consider the heart of all of us dealing with this type of issue. So hopefully what I'm sharing will be helpful for you, but do keep in mind that our organization is a little bit different. So there may be some variation. I wanted to just give you a sense of what our structure is. So we do have the university librarian who's over multiple libraries that are part of the library system. But then from there, we have our law library director, Larry Reeves. Within that group of people that he supervises are several standard law librarians, so head of faculty services, head of collection services, et cetera. And then there are library staff members and other law librarians that are supervised by various individuals in that context. And so it's kind of a flat structure. But I feel like we've really been able to, in the past year, and I've only been there for about a year and a half, but in the past year, we've really been able to kind of streamline how things were handled. And it's a really tight system and a really tight group that I think has handled this pretty well considering. In terms of who we serve, 557 JD students, so not a huge law school, but definitely sizable. About 72 LLM students. That obviously has changed given some of the visa issues that have arisen recently. About 50 full-time faculty members and about 91 part-time faculty members. And we also have members of staff who contact us for assistance as well. But I wanted to give you sort of an overview of who we serve so you have a sense of the dynamic that we're focusing on for our services. I thought it'd be helpful also to give you a timeline for this. So March 11th, 2020, the university ended all in-person classes. And then on March 16th, online instruction began and all of the law librarians began to work remotely. We actually did have to open the law library on March 23rd for an emergency printing access, but because the students were clamoring for one last opportunity to really go in and start printing everything. So our director actually went in and opened up on that day, and students spent all day printing. And then March 24th was the day that the law library was just closed for the rest of the semester. Unfortunately, for the students who graduated or who were going to graduate, well, they did graduate, they just didn't have their commencement ceremonies in May 2020. Um, the decision was made that there could be no in-person commencement opportunities. And so that is actually scheduled for this coming May for those people to have the opportunity to have their in-person commencement. But they did have virtual graduation, and they were celebrated in various ways by the university system. On June 1st, the larger library system decided to create what's called a pickup plan for getting access to specific books to different people. And so various members of specific libraries within the larger Vanderbilt library system sort of collaborated to figure out how we would make that happen. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Then August 10th, that was the first day of orientation for the class of 2023. And so at that point, the library opened back up for that week for orientation just for the new 1Ls. On August 17th, it reopened for everyone. So that's where we decided to go ahead and open for all the students, but also the hybrid system started for the law school. Ultimately, the law school decided that they were going to have in-person classes, but they were going to give students the option of attending completely remotely. And so for the students who decided to attend remotely, they would tune in via Zoom to the in-person classes that were happening. The instructors and the professors had to figure out how to really integrate them into the classroom in a meaningful way and make sure that they could participate in a meaningful way. Fortunately for us, legal research, as you know, was really great to teach online. So all of the legal research courses went online, and I'll talk with you about that in a bit. The last day of classes for this semester was just November 13th. We're now in our exam period. The entire semester was truncated to make sure that there was no period where the students would be going home and then coming back. So no fall break whatsoever this semester, purely getting through the semester in 13 weeks, then taking your exams and then going home for Thanksgiving, and you're not coming back until the spring. The first day of spring classes is scheduled to be January 19th, and then the last day of spring classes is scheduled to be April 19th. So how that works out, we'll see. I will tell you that the Nashville area, like many other areas in the country, has experienced sharp rises in COVID numbers again. So, there's some concern that perhaps there'll be another shutdown locally. I think it's unlikely that Tennessee statewide would shut down for various reasons, but there's things that obviously the university administration is looking at, the law school administration is looking at in terms of determining what next spring will look like. But that's the plan. When we really look back at everything, I think there are four areas that were most affected for us in terms of COVID. One being library access, one being library collections, another being research instruction, and then the last being reference services. So I want to kind of focus on those four areas and talk with you about how things worked for us, and also hear from you, how things have been working for you. If you have questions or what have you, please feel free to jump in because I'm happy to talk with you about those. So first, in terms of library access, I mean, in the immediate notification that Nashville was doing a shutdown, that the university was going to do a shutdown, it was obvious that all of the law library staff was going to go remote. So on March 16th, as I said, we all went remote. We did open up for the 23rd to address student printing needs, but then physical access ended on March 24th. And that was something that we really had to quickly think about how we would continue to serve our community, not just the Vanderbilt community, but also members of the public who sometimes do come to us for assistance, because at that point it was just a complete shutdown. As I'll talk about in a second, we were still teaching at that point, so that was an issue. But just in terms of some of the things that we have in the library in terms of resources, and then some of the use of the library space as study space. So students were used to being able to study for things or plan for classes within the library space, and they lost all of that pretty quickly once the shutdown order happened, both from the mayor and then from the university. During the summer, all of our work was done remotely. There were only occasionally would some of the circulation workers go in to do work, but at that time, the university was still figuring out how we wanted to handle things as simple as, when we get a book back from the book drop, how do we quarantine that? I'm sure all of you have been in that same position of initially figuring out, with the CDC guidelines, what can we even do? What's the safest way to handle any of this? So at that point, all work was done remotely. Books were being turned in. The book shops were pretty full because we hadn't really figured out a way in terms of the entire library system to decide, how to quarantine those things. Ultimately, it was the main library that kind of put together a plan for quarantine, and then all the other libraries, like the medical library, law library, education library, et cetera, followed suit on that. But for the entire summer, there was no access for students, faculty, staff, or members of the public. And then our assistance, in terms of access to that assistance, was limited to email and virtual chat. And I'll talk with you about the virtual chat in a second. For fall, because we did reopen, we were able to really kind of expand some of the services that we had closed down. The law librarians are all still remote, but there were various workers from circulation and collections who came in, and they were the ones who really handled the concepts of, or the process of, quarantining the books, setting things up the way that they needed to be. All of the floors in the building of the law school were changed because they had to put, they had to determine what the routes would be for travel to maintain social distancing. So the entire law library during that time was really being reconfigured for two purposes. One, to make sure that the students weren't able to, be too close in the closed stacks. So the closed stacks were, or the stacks were shut off so that students couldn't go there. So if they had a request, then we would, pull that book for them or get that book for them, and then they would pick that up separately. But then also because the law library was the only space in the school that was large enough to have the entire class in there for the classes that all members of the same class attend. So, you've got the entire student body for the 1L section of, like, 100 and something people. That was the only space that was available to distance. So as a result of that, we kind of lost the law library space as any sort of study space, and really lost a lot of our ability to do any sort of programming or anything in there. And it was kind of remodeled for as a classroom space. And I'll talk about that in a bit as well. But during that time, during fall, there's been no access to members of the public. There's been no access to anybody who is not associated with the law school directly. There are a couple of concerns, obviously, that we've had about that. One is services to members of the public, right? So in terms of talking about access to justice and making sure that members of the public are able to get access to the legal materials that they need, we're really not sure at this point where the members of the public who are coming to us are going for that type of assistance, or are they going anywhere? Now, because we're a private school, we didn't receive a whole lot of contact or questions from members of the public anyway. And I don't know if that's a function of sort of finding, being able to find the law library, being willing to come in, any sort of intimidation with, the idea of going into a private school and accessing those things. Any of those concerns about access to justice could have prevented them coming in anyway. But for those who did, we are one of the few areas or school libraries in the area that had public Westlaw terminal access. We actually had 4 public terminals that were set aside for members of the public. We also had other people from the university who wanted to use them. So often graduate students from economics or business would want to have access to Westlaw, and they would come in and use the public terminals, and that worked out really well. So because we were able, or I guess still are able, to provide that specific resource, one of our concerns is, what's happened during this time period where members of the public and others have not been able to access that, because we have gotten specific questions about, can I get access to the Westlaw terminals? And right now the answer is no. because the entire law school was shut down to anybody who's not a member of the law school community. And as I said, members of the graduate students, the undergrads would often want access. Some undergrads were using the law school's law library space as study space because it's much quieter than other areas. And that was fine as long as they were within the certain time periods that were set for anybody to come in. And then the later hours of the evening were for just members of the law school community. We obviously adjusted our hours according to who could be in the building at what time. So really, our services in terms of what people could get by coming in ends around 5:30 or 6 o'clock. So nobody's going having access to the building after that. Additionally, for this semester, there were really strict guidelines set by the law school that there were only certain areas of the building that students could sort of use as a lounge area, if you want to put it that way. So the library was no longer really available for study space. Some of those places that they would have studied, like study rooms, have been reconfigured into Zoom rooms, which I'll talk about in a second. But the even just the feeling of the law school as a space to collaborate, as a space to kind of hang out and socialize, that's been changed because of the need to do that for COVID. So right now the students aren't as interested in using the library for that space. It really seems like, at least from what people that are on campus working, again, the librarians are all remote, but from what I'm hearing from people, it's very much go to your class, get what you need, print it, and leave. So it's very much a ghost town to some extent when classes aren't in session. And then for the spring, I don't know. I mean, the idea is that we could, in theory, have in-person classes the way, as I mentioned, things are going in Nashville right now. I would anticipate that we'll have the similar situation that we had this time, that there'll be hybrid classes. The students who want to live remotely will live remotely. I mean, there are a lot of students who made the decision that they were going to be remote to save on living expenses, because it's just easier for them to do that for many reasons. And so for those students, there's little reason to want to say, I'm going to come to Nashville for just, 6 months, do a semester, and then leave again. So I anticipate that it will be the same sort of setup for next semester. Certainly for the law librarians, in terms of research instruction, it'll be the same. But I'll talk about that in a bit. But I hope that at some point during the spring semester, we're at least able to open back up for members of the public to access those public Westlaw terminals, and for other members of the Vanderbilt community to use the building to a larger extent. But obviously, that's something to be determined ultimately by the law school administration, since they set the rules on the building access. All right. In addition to the access, I wanted to talk briefly about how our collections have changed. So prior to COVID, we had significant usage of print materials, but obviously a much greater usage of ebooks and e-journals, and significant database usage. So for us, some of the heaviest users of our print materials are faculty members. So there's still a lot of faculty members that really prefer to have their materials in print, but for various reasons, there are other students who wanted things in print. For example, some of the academic journals really like to have access to things in print. So we did find that there's been significant usage for quite a while of our print materials. Well, once this happened in terms of COVID, we really had to reconfigure how we were going to get access to different things. So the library system as a whole created what they called a book pickup plan in collaboration with the main law library ILL team. The law library itself has a separate ILL team and sort of a separate collection services group that works just on the law library aspects, because there were significant enough differences that it was determined that the main law library shouldn't have to figure all that out. We would just do that in-house. And so it was a matter not just of implementing the book pickup plan from the main library system, but then also figuring out how that worked with the system that we had internally within the law library. And so ultimately, it was a system where certain people would come into the library. Very strict rules about them coming in. Everybody had to create or take a specific online training course about, protective equipment and handling materials. Additionally, everyone had to sign a disclaimer basically when you wanted to come onto campus. But for those few members of the library staff across the library systems, they essentially worked out a plan where certain people would go into whatever library, pick up whatever print material, and there'd be a central point for students, faculty, and staff to pick up whatever print materials were needed outside of the library. So essentially, for the main library, there's this deck area, and that's where they would, at scheduled times, put out these materials so that there weren't people coming into the main library, and so that social distancing could be maintained. And again, this was a time period when we weren't sure, does COVID live on? How long does COVID live on? Surfaces. It was still very unclear to us how that works. So, in abundance of caution, that's how it was set up. We also did get, as I'm sure many schools got, a lot of emergency access to sources. So, current vendors that we've been working with expanded a lot of their services to provide emergency access to some electronic sources that we would not have had otherwise. And new vendors that we didn't have current contracts with, also provided things in terms of access to new resources. I mean, I'm thinking even Blue Book. I know that many schools were contacted by Blue Book to say, we will give your legal writing faculty members, free online access to this. So it really was, for the summer, a time period where we were getting a lot of access to these sort of things. And I know that, some of that to a certain extent is marketing, and that hopefully you'll continue to want this after the emergency access is over. But for our needs, that was very helpful. And then obviously, HathiTrust access was huge for us this summer in terms of some of the print materials that we didn't have access to. So we became one of the libraries that, or well, the entire Vanderbilt library system became one of the library systems that worked with HathiTrust to sort of get emergency access to their resources as well. And we still have access to those resources. So far this semester, for fall, the continuation of the pickup plan has been very successful. They've worked in some scanning of electronic material, or scanning of print materials for electronic distribution, as well as the actual pickup of the hard copy books. We no longer have access to a lot of the emergency materials that we had, and some of those we decided to go ahead and purchase because we found that they were really well received and needed by faculty members and students, and some of those we didn't. We've definitely had an increase in ebook purchases, but with the continued access to HathiTrust, we've had to be very careful about how our community accesses certain books. Obviously, if it's something that we could give e-access to, then we wouldn't provide the print version of that in terms of some of the requirements for the HathiTrust access. But that also has been an issue because, again, a lot of our faculty members want that in print. A lot of our academic journals prefer to have that in print. So we've had to really figure out how to deal with those continued requests for print resources. Research instruction. So I would say that one of the major things that was a rapid change for us really did come in terms of research instruction. So at the point where there was the shutdown in spring 2020, we only had one class left in the first year legal research. So we have 5 weeks with the students in the spring. Our first year legal research is part of the larger legal writing course. So our research, the students' research grades are 20% of their legal writing grades for each semester. And so essentially, we're working with the legal writing instructors to sort of have a nice collaboration, make sure that they're getting all the research instruction they need, but then sort of tailoring that to some of what they're doing in the legal writing process. And at that point, we had one class left, and that was scheduled to be April 6th. So we had to very quickly decide how we were going to do this. We did make the quick change to Zoom instruction. Vanderbilt did very quickly go ahead and get licenses for everyone to Zoom. So that was the primary resource that we used. But we really didn't have a lot of time to coordinate in terms of how we were going to do that last class. So some of us took different paths. Some people decided they were going to go ahead and record a video lecture. I actually was one of the people who decided to do that, and then use the time that we would have met during that in-person class time as office hours. Some people decided they were going to go ahead and hold a synchronous session during that hour that they would normally have class. There were lots of different ways that people decided to handle that. And ultimately, I think they were all successful. But the quick turnaround really didn't allow us a lot of time to plan how we were going to do that and make it as cohesive as probably I it could have been. But again, everybody was in the same boat at that point, so that makes sense. Summer really did allow us a little more time for planning the teaching process. We were 100% planning for online only instruction, at least for 1L instruction. There was some question for the upper level research courses, whether things were going to be online and in person or in person. And at that point, there was still the idea that we could have in person upper level classes in the law school during the fall if we wanted to. Ultimately, it was determined that all of the classes for research needed to go online because when the administration was figuring out, space for classes and distancing, it became easier to take out legal writing and take out legal research and just deal with those doctrinal classes and the upper level skills classes being actually on site. And a lot of the doctrinal classes went online only as well. So we were preparing for the 1L instruction for online only instruction. We also spent a lot of time during the summer talking about teaching tools. So we had Zoom. Some of us really liked Screencast-O-Matic and wanted to use that for some of our teaching. So we did end up getting licenses for Screencast-O-Matic. And we used Brightspace as our course management system. So Kaltura was available through Brightspace for us to use. And some of us, prefer some things more than others, but we were really fortunate to have a variety of resources that we could use to do this. We didn't decide that we were going to use any one tool. Basically, we started planning for the fall in terms of the concepts that needed to be taught, in terms of our overall objective, and then revamping the exercises and assignments. And then from there, everybody kind of, decided how they wanted to present that content on their own with the understanding that there were certain objectives that everybody needed to meet. So for our first year legal instruction for the fall, we have 6 weeks. So there are multiple sections of students, about 22 students per section. Each of us, of the teaching librarians, so about 5 of us, plus the director, teach roughly 2 sections, sometimes 1 section, depending on what other things are being taught. We did not come to a consensus about whether we wanted to teach this synchronously or asynchronously. We basically decided, everybody's going to do what they feel comfortable with. Some of us decided to include synchronous sessions, but mostly have asynchronous work. Some of us decided to go completely asynchronous and use those class periods as essentially virtual office hours. So the idea would be that the students would come during the class time if they wanted to and ask us questions. They will have had the video lectures recorded that we recorded previously that they could review. And so it would be a good time for them to come talk to us about anything that they had questions about. Obviously, doing that brought new concerns. So for all of us, we really had to think about accessibility issues, whether we were having in-person or I'm sorry, synchronous or asynchronous classes. What are we doing in terms of captioning? What are we doing in terms of other accessibility issues? And so I'm one of the people who decided to teach completely asynchronously. And I will say that the captioning issue took up quite a bit of time for us since we had not been thinking about that previously. But I'm glad that, that this did happen so that we are now thinking about what are the materials that we can provide to our students, even when we go back to in-person teaching that might be helpful. And quite honestly, I'm considering maybe still doing some virtual or some recorded lectures with captioning, even in addition to the in-person class time, because I do think, and some of the feedback that I got from students was that it was really helpful for them to be able to go back to that content more than once, and then whenever they actually felt like it, as opposed to saying, hey, between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. on Tuesday, you better be really interested in legal research, when sometimes they just weren't. And would miss things in the lecture. Office hours, I did do virtual office hours, as most of us did, for those times that we did not have synchronous lectures. And so students were free to come talk to us. I personally did not make my virtual office hours required. I felt like at this point you're a law student, so if you feel like there's something you need to come talk to me about, please do come talk to me about it. Did get a lot of contact by email and did get some requests for Zoom consultation. So a lot of students really wanted to have time to sit down with me one-on-one via Zoom, especially regarding questions about with assignments, and to really talk things out. And I think for those students that worked out really nicely. Some students I could not identify to this day if I saw them in person, because they did not participate in the office hours. And I think that's okay. I think it's just a matter of what each student wants to get out of the class. For our feedback to students, we graded in the same way that we would normally grade. We gave them very specific feedback on their assignments. Oftentimes we did video responses to certain issues if we saw that there were similar issues that all students were having problems with, or that most students were having problems with. But engagement was a big part of our concern. How do we make sure that students are still engaged, if especially for the asynchronous classes, but even for those of us who did synchronous classes, some people did not want to require students to turn on their camera. So there's no real way to determine, how much engagement there is. Um, Working in quizzes, which Brightspace does allow you to do, and I'm sure some of the other management systems do too, really helped. Google feedback forms really helped as well. But that engagement piece was a huge piece for us in terms of figuring out how to successfully navigate this. But overall, we all received a positive reception from the students. I talked to a lot of 1Ls who really felt like, because they decided to go remote to save money, that it was a big deal for them not to have to come to campus and have this course, that they could contact us whenever they needed to contact us virtually, and go from there. For the semester as a whole, for the first years, the doctrinal courses were front loaded. So Monday through Friday, they had nothing but doctrinal courses, and it's a very different schedule than the 1Ls normally had. So by the time we talked with them on Thursday, and all of the legal research courses were on Thursday for fall semester, they were wiped out. So again, being able to go back to the video content and take a look at that was really helpful for them, based on what we were hearing. So that was extremely positive. For the upper level instruction, we had 3 upper level research courses in the fall. We have a full semester advanced legal research class. I actually taught that this semester. We have a transactional legal research course that's 7 weeks, and then a legal practice technology course that's 7 weeks. So I know that the other 2 law librarians who taught the transactional and and legal practice courses had positive experience, but I'll talk more specifically about ALR, since that's what I taught. It was the first time that it was taught online, and it was a lot of work to, as I'm sure any of you have put together an online course, right? Know that it was a lot of work to kind of translate what we would be doing in person into an online course. In terms of synchronous versus asynchronous, I did decide to teach the course asynchronously. That got a lot of positive response from the second years and third years. Actually, for this semester, usually the ALR course is only open to second and third years, but really by the time that people are able to register with their priority, it's really only third years. So at this point, the students are in their last year of law school, first semester. Some of them decided that they were going to go remotely because it worked well with what they're doing, aside from school. So if they're doing any internships or what have you. And so that reception was really positive. But again, the feedback and engagement engagement aspect is one that I'm really interested in following up on, because I don't really know that we had the same quality. I know we didn't have the same quantity of interaction, but not really sure that the quality of interaction was the same for those who did come to virtual office hours. And I'm striving to figure out, if we do teach this online in the future, how can I make it a little more engaging for students? Perhaps perhaps I should include a couple of synchronous sessions with the asynchronous session. So I'm still thinking about all that. Next semester, two other law librarians are going to teach the same advanced legal research full semester course. So they're thinking now about how they're going to do that. But with the number of law librarians we have teaching, I think every semester will likely to have that full semester course taught. And so in talking with everybody together and collaborating, I think we'll be able to get a sense of what's worked best for some of us and what's worked or not worked as well for others, and have a better sense of continuity between each section, between each semester. So lessons learned, definitely for preparation for teaching in the spring. We really needed that early planning that we did for the summer. And we really needed a lot of consistency between the 1L sections. We did not have the same number of teaching meetings and planning meetings that we would have normally had if we were in person. And so I think some of that led to a lack of consistency between the 1L sections. Now, not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but I think that if our overall goal was to meet certain objectives, or to make sure that our students fully understood certain objectives, it might have been helpful to maybe coordinate that a little bit more. I know that at least for this year, it seemed like students as a whole felt very isolated and didn't have that same 1 year experience of being able to sit next to somebody and talk to them about what their study plan is, planning study groups. It wasn't the same type of experience that that we had when we were in law school, because almost everything was virtual. So I think being able to have a little bit more consistency would be helpful there. And I know we're hoping to really use this break period to be consistent about that. I also think that for the next semester, I'm going to work in a little more synchronous work. I think at least the first class and perhaps a middle class or last class, having synchronously might build a little bit more engagement. I think that if I had had the first class synchronously for fall, I would at least have a sense of knowing the students a little bit better, and then going from there. And then more check-ins between us. As I said, we didn't really have a lot of teaching and planning meetings once the semester was going, and a lot of things were discussed via Microsoft Teams or via chat. So I think if we planned a few more check-ins, some meetings, and talking about what we were doing and what our plans were as things were going, especially where things had to be, we had to be flexible and things had to be changed quickly, that would have been helpful as well. And then finally, for reference services, I think reference services was probably something that changed the most after research instruction. So prior to COVID, we obviously had in-person assistants. Each law librarian is a faculty liaison for a member of the law faculty. We had a strong, or we still have, but we had a strong student instructor connection. Generally, students who have questions about whatever issue would come directly to whoever taught them 1L legal research. That's just practically how it worked out, as opposed to going to well, there's not a real reference desk, but going to the circulation desk and asking for somebody to come out and answer a question. So thankfully, we were able to have that type of relationship for our students where they just drop by our office and ask us questions. The academic journals, would come ask us questions. Different ones of us are liaisons to specific journals. We have 5 academic journals. So there's always a point person for the journals as well. And then questions from the public. As I said, we didn't get a whole lot, but we did get some. And those, were fairly regular when we did get those. We also provide telephone assistance. We didn't have a whole lot of telephone questions in general, but when we did, it was very easy to just, for the person at the main desk to forward those questions to whoever was on call for reference. And then we would answer those questions. And then email reference, we also get a lot from faculty members. So that's basically how things were structured in terms of our reference services. Since COVID, obviously, we don't have the library open to anybody who's not a member of the law library community. So the members of the public are not getting any service currently. Our own site services are limited to circulation issues. So if people want to, pick up something from the book pickup plan, they can come to the law library and do that. If they have printing questions or they want to use the printer, they can come do that. But really, it's mostly access services that's having that interaction in person with students and faculty right now. We got a lot of academic journal questions as we normally do, but I think it was more noticeable this time because all the academic journal questions went through the pickup plan service. So each of us was able to see, how many requests students on journals are making for specific materials for site checking. And so we realized that this is a really significant number of requests that are being made. And then we also do Zoom consultations as needed. So again, students might have questions about things in the class, or faculty members might have questions, which we did have a lot of questions from faculty members. So we really implemented the Zoom consultations as needed. A significant decrease in telephone assistance. All of us have our office numbers forwarded to our cell phones or our home phones, but because the library was closed for so long, we're really not getting calls from people who are asking us questions. Essentially, if members of the public are contacting the law library, then they're told there's no access, et cetera. And so occasionally we'll get a question or two, either virtually or by telephone, but not a lot of telephone assistance. A significant increase in email assistance, particularly from faculty members and particularly from students. And then we did start in April a virtual chat service, which we had not had. It had been all in-person telephone and email. And so that virtual chat service is open weekdays from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And even though we don't get a whole lot of questions, we get a lot of feedback that faculty members and students love having that there. So even after COVID is not a major concern anymore, I can't imagine that that service is going anywhere, because now the faculty members and the students are used to having it. And it's a really efficient way to deal with their questions in a quick manner. Um, Expanded services. So we also found that we had to really serve as guides for some of the faculty members for their online instruction. There are a lot of faculty members who had no desire to teach online, didn't necessarily know how to teach online or how to use Zoom or some of these sources. And so we were the ones to say, let's set up a system. We'll be your students. You do your presentation, really working with them to make sure that they were comfortable with the technology, but then also sort of translating some of what they're doing pedagogically to the online instruction world. I will tell you from talking with the law IT, there were a lot of questions that they received just about, making this work. It's not working, I can't share my screen, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm thankful that honestly we didn't have to deal with any of that, but I'm glad we did have the opportunity to at least work with some of their higher level questions about moving to online instruction. We also had the opportunity to do a lot of virtual research training. So obviously, a lot of us do training sessions for classes where we actually go into the class and we'll talk about it. Those were moved to virtual. And that worked well, especially since we normally create libguides or research guides for certain courses anyway. Moving those to virtual research training sessions worked well. Also being embedded within certain faculty members' Brightspace course pages. So some faculty members are more receptive to that than others. I find that clinical professors are really receptive to that, in terms of, us being there as a presence, students directly asking us questions via Brightspace if they have research questions, and us directly sharing sources on the Brightspace page. And then we created a lot of additional libguides and research guides related to COVID, related to social justice and the Black Lives Matter movement, since that was all happening and still happens, but was all happening or really getting started during the summer, and really having a lot more resources than we would normally have for a summertime or for a fall. Overall, in terms of lessons learned, I would say, other than wash your hands, always, always wash your hands. 4 things. We've got a lot of uncertainty. I don't think any of us really know what's going to happen next, but flexibility is key. I think with the immediate closures that happened in March, everybody was kind of taken aback. But once we got into summer and into fall, certainly we really started realizing that how flexible we had to be about certain things. I think also law faculty realized how flexible they had to be to make things work. And I think that the relationships that we have with law faculty and the relationships that we have with each other will be better for that in the long run. Collaboration also makes things easier. So, to the extent that we were able to collaborate with each other among ourselves, but then also collaborating with other law librarians, hearing, what other people are doing that's working, collaborating with faculty members to try to make things work, like with the embedded Brightspace pages or embedded librarians in the Brightspace pages, that all helped. And then sharing ideas and experiences just like this. I want to know what you guys are doing because maybe it's something we should be doing and vice versa. So I think that as long as we continue doing that, it's going to be really, really helpful for us in terms of maintaining success. So I really want to hear, from you all what you guys are doing and how your semesters went. I appreciate the opportunity. I want to point out a couple of sources. AALL has the coronavirus updates and resources page that they're still updating. So if you're still looking for resources, please do take a look. Edna Lewis from Berkeley and I co-authored an article for Spectrum about the early days of COVID and how academic law libraries responded, and how Berkeley and Vanderbilt responded were slightly different. So it'd be interesting if it might be interesting to take a look and see those differences there. Faye Jones from UIUC did a very great article about disaster planning and the virtual law libraries in the face of this. And then I love this slide deck. I just found it online for free. So I wanted to give you the link in case you ever have to do a coronavirus slide deck. I think it works really well. So in any case, please feel free to contact me if you ever have any questions or want to talk about any of this or have ideas that you want to share, or you've heard something that you think I could be doing better. I would really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you guys about it. So if there's questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. Jocelyn.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Glenitra. This has been great. I was wondering, first of all, if you could drop the link to that slide deck into the chat, because I tried to grab it from the screen and I was not quick enough.
Oh, yeah. I will share my
else
slides. I'm sorry.
may have that problem. And also, I'm in a different form of library. I'm a court librarian, but I am working on our COOP, continuing operations and procedures, that plan. And I was wondering, just in retrospect, during those first couple of weeks that you were working from home, if there are any tips that you had for people for just memorializing the process of switching over to that method of instruction, and just any sort of little tips and tricks that you have from that we might want to just write down for future pandemics, which I hope we don't have.
Hopefully not.
But you know what? Hurricanes and earthquakes happen all the time, and someone's going to need to use a coop at some point. So
yeah. Sure. So I was very fortunate in that both the library system and the university system really carefully charted every decision that was made. And so they would update the web pages very frequently so that any of us could always go back and see, wait, where are we in this process? And then I basically would copy and paste that and put it into my own little document. I'm one of those people who's a note taker. I want to be able to look back 3 years from now and figure out why I did something. So I actually have a journal that I put things in. It's not a journal, but a line journal that I put things in. And so for me personally, what I found helpful for teaching was to take my normal structure and my normal objectives and then actually do comments, like track changes, comments in Word, and put in why I was making certain changes or how I thought that might help. And then I would just save that as a separate file. And so ideally what I will do now, the break has happened, is go back and look at what I decided and then change what I need to change arranged for fall. From a library-wide system, we really didn't have anything that we memorialized, except that we did create various channels on Teams, and everything that we had to say we put there. So we can go back and look through those discussions on Teams, but I'm thinking even a SharePoint file or something like that might have been a more official memorialization of that. So I think that's a great idea. I wish I had more tips and tricks to share, but really, I just did a lot of personal, note taking, a lot of taking what was given from the university and from the library system, and then working that into my own format.
That's really useful. Thank you, Clinitra. That gives me ideas of what to do next time. I think I missed the boat on taking as many notes as I should have this time around, but
You're gonna get them.
yeah.
Does anybody want to share? I don't know how much time we have, but what they're doing in their library?
I had a question actually
Sure.
about, you mentioned your access services team. I wonder, like, how did the research team collaborate with the access services, so you make sure you're sharing that information and on the same page about stuff? Because I think you really need those on-site people, but sometimes information gets lost in the mix. So
Sure. So we have weekly law library meetings anyway. And so those meetings we moved to Teams. And so everybody would join in and we'd talk about the different issues that were coming up. And we would hear feedback from the really two primary staff members who actually now have been promoted to librarians because they got their MLSs. So now they're part of the official law librarian team. And so for those two staff members, one in collections and one in access services, they're in there every day and they're seeing, how they're having to really improvise to make things work. And so we would get that feedback directly from them at the meetings. And then we were able to kind of change what we were doing or modify what we were doing accordingly. I'll give you an example. With the pickup system, a lot of the pickup system requests went through reference. Well, each of the law librarians is assigned to reference 1 day a week. We would get the request and we have to monitor to determine whether it's something that we could use HathiTrust for, if it was something that was in print. So we couldn't we had to send them to the electronic, we couldn't give them the print, etc. So at some point we realized we are messing the system up because the access services librarians have a lot more information about how the workflow is going for that plan. And so we ultimately ended up creating a separate, and this is all via LibChat, a separate LibChat account for the access services folks, so that if we got a request, as soon as we decided or we determined that no, there's no electronic access for this, we sent it directly to that access services account and they were able to deal with it from there, because it was a lot of back and forth, us having to ask the patron, have you tried this? Yes, we have. We tell access services, they say, did you ask them this? And so we kind of cut ourselves out as the middleman for a lot of that. And that made a huge difference. So between the library meetings, we're really sharing everything, the Teams chat where we're sharing a lot of different information, and then setting up those accounts, that was super helpful in terms of maintaining contact. We're not a huge or group anyway. I mean, I know there's a lot of law libraries that have much larger staff, so our ability to talk about these things is I think much easier, and coordinate is much easier. For a larger law library staff, I don't know that it would have worked as well, and we probably would have needed something a little more formal.
great, thank you. I have one more question too. So how
Sure.
did you handle like bar prep space? Did you have anything for those students or
So
graduates?
yeah, so that did become an issue. Um, so when I say that the library was closed, you're right. There was specific dispensation given by the dean for students who were studying for the bar. And so they did use some of the study rooms for that. It was a very limited time period that they were, I mean, I would say they were really only using it for about a month by the time it was decided that they could have special access, all of that. And so there was very little contact that we had with them. Honestly, we were still remote. Access services would have things open for a little bit, and then when those hours were over, they were done. Thankfully, the students were okay with that. I think everybody understood why this was the situation that it was, but we did make special access, or we did give special access to them for the space itself. The resources that we had for bar study, we created a LibGuide for the bar exam LibGuide, essentially, so everybody could go to that, see what was available, and then use that. And then the some of the bar materials themselves were available right at circulation on reserve. So there wasn't a lot of problems with getting that information, but it was not as rigorous, I think, as what we would normally give, or at least my experience there so far, what we would normally give the students for bar review. That was an issue that did arise, but I think they rolled with that really, really well.
Great, thank you.
No
Sorry,
problem.
if there's any more questions, just feel free to chime in.
And if not, I'm glad to talk to you guys about this. Like I said, please, if you have ideas, let me know. We're looking for them, and I'm happy to share anything I have with you as well.
Yes, I'm so glad that you presented on this. It's really great to see all the things that other people are doing, and we've all adapted and are flexible in our own ways, but you want to learn from other people too.
Yeah. Well, great. I hope you have a great day.
Yes, thank you. Feel free to send us questions after, and hopefully we can collaborate on other stuff.
That would be great. And I'll send you my slides too, so you have those.
Yes, I will be sharing those out to the group after this. Thank you, everyone. Thank
All
you,
right. Thanks.
Quamitra.
Have a good day. Thanks.
Bye.